Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the premiere podcast of the English Champion Substack. I'm going to try something a little different this week. I usually write 2 columns a week, and I thought I'd experiment a little bit with the podcast feature on Substack and talk through some ideas instead of writing them out. And we'll see how it goes. I've been thinking about this idea for quite a while now, probably over 2 years, and I've been thinking about it even more deeply in the last year, and I'm currently teaching a class in the humanities, sort of a survey, great books, great ideas course, and these ideas sort of became much more prominent in my mind, and I've been hashing them out with my classes, and I thought I'd share them here. So again, I've been working through this idea for a while, but I thought in what's going on in my academic life and what is going on in the broader culture, I thought now is as good a time as any to talk about it. And I'm going to lay out a bit of an argument for you, and you can decide what you think of it. There are a number of things that occurred during the Enlightenment that were not brand new. They had been occurring for sometimes hundreds of years, sometimes even thousands of years. But really, they became more explicitly codified, or perhaps just more culturally embraced as proper methodology during this time period. So the Enlightenment was a very important time period for the development of ideas and the implementation of cultural systems. Again, not that they were brand new, but they became more accepted as an improved way of governing or of participating in culture. And so those are some of the ideas I want to talk about here. Relating this to what's going on in our current culture, we continue to see an erosion of faith in institutions. There are constantly polls that describe how we're not trusting some of these foundations of our culture, whether it's journalism or government or academia. We seem to be drifting away from the processes of how culture operates and moving sometimes viciously, even violently, towards a results mindset. We want things as an end to our liking, and we're sort of neglecting the process for how you might achieve that. In other words, if I don't get the result I want, therefore then I complain about it. This might happen in journalism especially, or in our voting processes, or I might manipulate the processes to get the results I want, regardless of how others feel. And this is common in journalism as well, also in academia, where if I think things should be better, then I'm going to teach my students to sort of carry on my ideas and implement them for me, and so that I can aim at the ends that I want. And this is pretty dangerous when we can't trust the institutions and the cultural staples that have guided us for so long. We're at risk of falling apart, and that's what we continue to see almost weekly in the culture and on the news and online and wherever else we view the culture. We saw this in 2000. We saw it in 2004. We saw it in 2016 by those on the left who thought those elections were, quote, stolen. And then we saw it on the other side in 2020 when those on the right made the exact same argument. And so we're seeing these arguments about how things aren't turning out the way we want or how my side wants it. And we can't continue on when half the country thinks every institution is being operated unfairly. This is what's going to tear our country apart, and we see it happening all around us. So we can't keep claiming that we can't keep claiming that those who disagree with us are somehow always a threat to democracy, a buzz phrase we keep hearing, or that anyone who disagrees is spreading misinformation, another trendy phrase, or that even worse, that if you disagree you must be some sort of bigot, you're prejudiced or overly biased against certain groups of people. Many people who are unhappy or who are showing distrust in these institutions simply want the processes improved, I would argue. They want to be able to trust those institutions. They need to be able to trust them. Those customs, those aspects of our culture that are supposed to be reasonably stable. We need things to turn to when things get messy. And right now, we're lacking in places to turn. And that's not good for us as a nation. There are several vital areas of American life that have been ignoring processes I'm going to outline here shortly, particularly in the last couple of years, and I'll explain those as I go. So the thesis I'm sort of working from here is that processes are more valuable than outcomes. We need to get back to focusing on process. If you've been with this Substack since last spring, you'll know that I taught a course. One of my English courses I teach is about literature and sports as a theme, and so I treat sports just like any work of literature, any epic or any hero's journey. That was sort of my way into getting kids to care about literature more deeply. And in that class, I shared a story. I'll share it just really quickly here again, that goes to this idea of games or sports as a model for how we actually conduct life. And so I told the story previously of one time my wife and I were playing a board game one evening. We were playing Trivial Pursuit. We like playing board games, and that one's probably my favorite because it's about useless knowledge, and we teachers tend to have a lot of it, so it's kind of fun for me. And she goes along with me because she is a good sport. So when you play that game, of course the goal is to win, but this one time when she and I were playing, something happened. I won the game, but something strange happened. And in the rules state that when you get a question right, you get to keep going. So your turn goes on and on until you miss a question. So we started the game. She went first, and she happened to miss her first question. So, of course, it was my turn. And I answered the first question correctly, and the second one, and the third one. And pretty soon I was gathering up pies, and I'd made it all the way around the board, and I'd actually won the game without ever missing a question. Now, that was a one-time fluke. That's never happened before or since, and it's not to say that somehow I'm some genius at this. It just was, happened to be questions I knew. And I won the game, and I played by the rules. But even I knew, even though I was happy to win, even I knew this wasn't a good outcome. It's not good when one person is the only one who really gets to play. My happiness in winning was a bit overshadowed by the fact that something had gone wrong here. The process of playing was inadequate. I achieved my outcome, but the process didn't work. So, because I value playing the game even more than I value winning, and I love winning more than anything in the world, I want to be able to keep playing. And if this were to happen again, it wouldn't take long before my wife or anyone else I'm playing with would say, "Forget this. I'm not going to play. This game is boring. There's a chance I won't even get to participate. So why even play?" And so right after we played that game, we had a conversation, and I said, "Let's adjust the rules a bit." I said, "Let's, instead of going until you miss, let's say you get to repeat your turn until you get a pie, which is, what you're trying to accumulate. And then once you've achieved that, it's the other person's turn. And then, you go from there." And so that's how we play from now on. And it gives the other person a chance to stay in the game. So, again, the process for improving the game doesn't necessarily improve the process of the outcome I want. If that were all that mattered, then I would try to manipulate the game in any way where I always win. Well, again, that's not going to make another person want to play very much. So I'd rather play than not play. So the question then becomes, how do I implement processes so that we can keep playing? And yes, I'm going to try to win every time. I have no sympathy for my wife. I want to bury her whenever we play. But I also want her to keep playing. It's no fun for me to suggest playing a game some night, and whether it's her or anyone else that's at my house says, "No, I don't want to play." Then I miss out on the fun too. So the game matters more than the outcome matters. So I shared that story in my class, and as I was thinking through this idea of process, let me offer one more analogy. We're in a situation where this seems to be what's happening in the broader culture, socially and politically. Let's say there's a sports commissioner of a league, and there's only 2 teams in the sports league. And let's just, for simplicity and recognition's sake, call them the Yankees and the Red Sox. So this commissioner has grown up his whole life as a Yankees fan, let's say. And he tells all the players and the coaches and the fans of the league that the Yankees are the best team, and if you support the Red Sox, not only are you stupid and probably evil, but you're a threat to the sport itself. If you don't support the Yankees, we may no longer even have a league anymore. So imagine someone saying that, who was the leader of this league. Everyone would agree that this is no way, to run that sport. All that's going to do is make Red Sox supporters even angrier. They're going to feel like games aren't fair. And worst case scenario, they may just give up and go decide to start a different league. Then the Yankees won't even have anyone to play against. So if the goal, kind of like my board game example, if the goal is the continuation of the game or the sport or the league so that everyone can enjoy the games regardless of who happens to win the championship that year, the commissioner would need to focus on how everyone can feel like the games are fair, they are enjoyably competitive, and they are repeatable. In other words, each side is going to want to keep playing next season and hopefully even beyond. So this is a processed mindset rather than one kind of blindly devoted to outcome in which my team is always right and my team should win all the time. So the goal is that when the game is over, everyone who is involved, everyone, even the loser, can say that it was a fair contest and that they would be happy to play again. That's the goal. So let's connect this idea back to the Enlightenment and as well as sort of our current events. There's 4 major areas that we keep hearing about in the culture. And so those are the 4 that I want to kind of highlight for you here and talk about process being more important than outcome. First, we keep hearing the word democracy. You can't turn on television or see an interview or read an article online without hearing some political person talking about democracy. And both sides are, fearing or spreading fear that the other side is going to ruin democracy, right? That it's going to break it apart and we won't have it anymore. The thing to consider, and this is where some of America's founding fathers and early leaders come in, is that they were not starting in trying to decide how we're going to operate this brand new country called the United States. They were not starting from a premise of utopia and working backwards for how they wish things could be. All right? They knew we're not going to end at perfection where everyone here is happy. And so let's work backwards and put rules in place so that we achieve this thing called utopia and perfection and ultimate happiness for everyone. That's not possible. So what these founders did very smartly is they started instead with human nature and basically worked forward from that, saying, okay, what are things we can implement knowing the fallen nature of humans so that when humans behave as humans will behave, they don't ruin everything. That's a very different outlook, and they were focused on process. How do we put processes in place that doesn't lead to our destruction versus how do we get the result we want and manipulate the system to achieve the ultimate result? That's not what they did. Read the Federalist Papers, especially numbers 10 and 51, which are documents that I'm talking about in class. Those are documents that are not about, if my side loses, then I riot or I complain. It's, no, we're going to develop a process so that even if what I want doesn't happen, I can still continue in the process. So when we hear the word democracy being thrown around and how everything is a threat to democracy, we have to ask ourselves, well, what's so threatening about it? If everything's a threat, then you must have a particular end in mind, when what you should have in mind is a process for everyone to participate and feel good about participating, even if ultimately they don't get what they want. That's okay. There is a compromise to be made, and that's what the process is for. So democracy is one of these key terms that is failing right now in its sort of excessive pursuit of outcome rather than a quality process that should be implemented. Sort of along with that is the notion of justice, and this is where our Bill of Rights and our Constitution come into play. And so, when we think about the process of achieving legal justice, it's not, if my guy loses the case, then I get to riot. We saw this with in 2020 with some of whether it was the George Floyd case or any case where there's sort of heightened tensions on both sides, where it seems to those people who are so invested in an outcome that there's only one answer. The only way this can go is my side wins and the other side is punished. Rather than what we should be thinking is, what is the process so that however this goes, it's as fair as possible, and when it's over, we can all agree that at least fairness in how it was executed, how the process was executed, has been achieved. That's the goal. Now, regarding our democracy and our legal justice system, many cynics, of course, say that, well, our founders who wrote these documents only set up a system that benefited themselves, which is completely ludicrous, because no one who would set up a system to only benefit oneself would allow freedom of speech or press or any other opportunity for criticizing to be an integral part of the culture, nor would they implement the process of amendments to those laws in the Constitution. If you thought your way was only the right way, then you would set up a system in which your way was protected and no other way could be implemented. Well, that's not what they did. There's the Constitution and the Bill of Rights have within it a process, a sub-process for improving the larger process, which is why it's so genius. So that's what we're getting away from. We're getting away from the fact that, look, there is a process in place that aims at fairness for all involved. Whether you're a victim, whether you're the perpetrator, no matter who you are, no matter what class or race or whatever you belong to, if we follow the process, then at the end of it, we should reflect on it and say, okay, that was a fair process. Now, if it wasn't a fair process, again, the Constitution allows for the process to be improved. For example, the initial laws in the Constitution that did not allow non-whites or women to vote was a flawed process. It was good that there was a sub-process in place that we could fix that, and we did, of course. And so anytime there is something that appears to be a poor process, there is a way to fix it. It's not through rioting. It's not through even complaining about it. I see something that doesn't seem fair to all involved. We need to amend the process so that even if this process yields a conclusion that I don't necessarily agree with, I feel comfortable with the process. That's what justice is for. And that's how it protects people. Otherwise, not having these rules in place and not having a process for amending them and protecting people that's how tyranny occurs. So we can't let the reactionary, outcome-oriented arguments take precedence. That's not what our culture is founded on. It has to be rooted in process. So democracy, we need to be more cognizant of how we're talking about that. Our legal system, justice system, we need to be more aware of how we're talking about that and emphasizing process. The third area is, especially became evident in the last 2 years with COVID. The scientific method itself is a process. It is not focused on outcome. In fact, the scientific method is purposefully not focused on outcome. The whole purpose of science is to disprove whatever you find. So when someone reaches a conclusion, they went through a process, they found some results, and then those results need to be tested to see if they might be inaccurate. It is constantly testing and questioning results. The scientific method is the opposite of outcome orientation. It is all process. And as we've seen the last 2 years, we have been much more, our scientific leaders have definitely been leaning more toward, there's a conclusion that I want to see, and therefore I'm going to either only allow the voices that agree with me to be called scientific, or I'm going to maybe manipulate results so that I achieve the conclusion that I'm looking for. Those are not science. We cannot do that. That is looking for ends rather than processes. We can't do that. And seeking confirmation of what I believe is the opposite of science. Science is about testing yourself constantly. And the testing is the process. And so in the Enlightenment, whether it's over the span of time that includes Bacon or Descartes or Newton, these are people who became devoted to the process of discovering truth and how reality functions. And we constantly need to attempt to poke holes in it so that we can strengthen the conclusions that we do reach. If you don't allow other people to have a voice and do their own science and do their own research and share those conclusions, you are not yourself participating in science. And we've heard a lot of people the last 2 years say how they're doing science, or they are science, or they represent science, or anyone who disagrees with them is not doing proper science. That itself is anti-science. So we have to get back to the process of the scientific method. Finally, the fourth one, capitalism. Capitalism is a process. It is not a conclusion. It is not an outcome. It is a system whereby people participate, you exchange in trade, you do so voluntarily, and hopefully you get what you want, or at least something close to what you want. And both parties are satisfied. That is what true capitalism is. So in the Enlightenment, starting with Adam Smith and other early economists, this was the system that seemed to be the best, that allowed for the most freedom and the most kind of individual authority in choosing what you want. And so American laws, of course, are supposed to be designed toward protecting that process because it's the best thing we have. Of course, there are other economic systems, but the process nature of capitalism is the one that allows us to truly exercise our values as autonomous, rational beings, and avoids tyranny as best as we can manage. So when people criticize capitalism, what they're focused on results. They're thinking, well, this isn't, I didn't get what I want. Someone else has more than me. Yeah, that's an outcome perspective. What we need to be focusing on is, did capitalism allow you to make choices? Did it allow for competition? Did it allow for alternative products, services, ideas, whatever it is, to enter the marketplace and increase your opportunity for choice in exhibiting your values? If so, then that's the process we should want. So those four seem to be at the forefront of our current culture. The argument over what democracy represents, the argument over the legal system and the notion of law and justice, the idea of science, and then our economics of capitalism. These are all process-oriented, not outcome-oriented. So when people are arguing and they think they want things the way they want them so that their side wins, they're probably focused more on outcome than process. So really the consequence of all this is we're reaching, I think we could even say, a dangerous point in our culture where people, they no longer want to play the game. And if everyone thinks that the game is rigged, then they won't play. If my vote doesn't really matter because it's going to get lost in some machine, or other people are allowed to vote who aren't even citizens, or whatever the complaint is, like, we need a law, we need rules and processes to make sure everyone feels like they're being heard. Because ultimately, if people won't play, we don't have a culture anymore. And if you're only focused on outcome, well, that's when forced participation, you get this sort of or else mentality, begins. And that is quite literally tyranny. Vote the way I want you to, or else. Buy things in the marketplace that I want you to, or else. Listen to my science, or else. Agree with this verdict on this case, or else. Well, as I said, that's tyranny. We can't continue on by focusing on those outcomes where only one side is satisfied. So Winston Churchill famously said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. And the same has been said about capitalism. It's, capitalism's the worst economic system. Yeah, except for all the other ones. It's just the best we have. And when we're talking about processes for living in a culture where we've got hundreds of millions of other competing ideas, that's all you can do, is you can say, look, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy. We're just going to try to implement a system, a process in which it reduces some of the messiness so that we don't tear ourselves apart. And that's the best we can do. So when we're developing these systems, and this is what, I don't know if these weren't probably done on purpose, this is just how they worked out with the systems we've been discussing. They really only work when a couple features are present. One, the process needs to be voluntary. People need to want to participate freely. Coercion doesn't work because, again, either they'll just opt out and won't play, or they'll revolt, and now we have violence and all that stuff. So it has to be voluntary. People have to choose to participate because they value the process. Obviously, we value outcomes, but we also have to value the process, and I want to participate in it of my own choosing. Number two, it has to be iterative, it has to be repeatable. If I can't rely on this to be done in a subsequent occurrence where it only works one time, well, how do I know that was the real answer then? Maybe it worked that once, but if I can't rely on it for future events or future practices, then it probably wasn't that stable to begin with. So it has to be something that you can keep doing in the reasonable long run. Now, again, it doesn't mean it can't be changed, and processes need processes too. But again, it can't just be a one-time thing where I got what I want, therefore that was the right answer. No, it has to be, if we implement the system, we will get a result, and people will want to participate again voluntarily because the system can be repeated to our satisfaction. That's the goal. So it has to be voluntary, has to be repeatable. And the second, it has to allow for competition and cooperation. Again, we've got hundreds of millions of competing ideas and voices. So obviously not everyone's going to get what they want all the time. There are some things that just simply can't be implemented because they're too complex. They would affect different types of groups of people differently for whatever reason, or different locations differently. There has to be things that are sort of weeded out from the beginning because they just can't feasibly be implemented. So we have to allow competition. We have to allow ideas to flourish and compete against each other so that it's not the human beings and citizens fighting with each other. This process of sort of a controlled competition where we kind of know the rules of the game, that's the cooperation part of it. That means when we both participate, yes, we're competing against each other. I want to vote for that guy, you want to vote for that guy, and that's fine. We're competing with who we want to vote for. But we're engaging in a process that allows us to cooperate. You're going to give your speech, I'm going to give my speech, we're going to have this debate, we're going to engage in a voting process where everyone gets an equal chance to cast their ballot, whatever it is. That's the cooperation part of it, that we all agree to these rules of cooperation so that our ideas can compete with one another. So these systems, these processes, whether it's democracy, capitalism, science, or the legal system, they're voluntary, they're repeatable, and they allow for cooperative competition or competitive cooperation, whichever way you want to look at it. So the question then becomes, well, what is the process for that process? What is the through line between all of these processes? And we're seeing that more than ever, especially in the last couple of years. The process that ties it all together is speech. Ideally, we would say, well, some sort of moral code that everyone agrees with would potentially reach the same agreement, the same outcomes that everyone would be pleased with, because you'd all have the same morals, therefore you'd value the same things and you'd all like what you got. But of course that would never happen because we're just too diverse. So the only thing that we can do is talk to each other. We have to be able to learn from each other. We have to be able to share the ideas and let the ideas compete. We have to debate. We have to publish. We have to write and speak, because that's the thing that allows these processes to even exist. So how do these show up? Well, in democracy, your speech is your vote, right? You get a say in who the leader is or what policy is enacted. In science, your speech is your research, your writing, the presentation you might give. You can hold your idea up and you get to critique other people's ideas, and you allow other people to critique yours. We have to be able to speak through our scientific discovery so that we can learn from each other and see where we might have gone wrong. If we aren't allowed to speak and share our ideas, then we don't have real science. With justice, of course, your speech is voting. It could be arguing for legislation. Could be protesting with words, not riots, or even serving on a jury. That's when you listen to a court case and you get to vote on whether someone's guilty or not, that is exercising a form of speech to enact the process of fairness and justice. And with capitalism, your speech is how you spend your money. You always, you have a choice in what you want to buy, invest in, or what you produce to sell to other people. That's why the saying, put your money where your mouth is so accurate. Because when you buy one product over another, you're voting with your dollars, which is in essence, you're sort of publicly declaring, this is my preference. And it's symbolized by, the money you spend. So the idea of speech is what threads all of these ideas together, whether it's in vocal speaking, whether it's in the written form of speech, as in the press, or whether it's sort of symbolic speech with a vote or with the dollars you have. All of it represents your voice, and your voice is the only thing that allows these processes to continue. So again, we've become too focused on ends instead of means, and outcomes instead of processes. So we need to get back to embracing the process. We need to be able to say, after an election, after a scientific discovery or an invention, or after a court case, or after participating in the marketplace, we need to be able to say, I made my decision freely, The process seemed fair for everyone involved. And even if my preferred outcome wasn't achieved, you might say, I enjoyed participating and I look forward to doing it again. So this is the only way to bring so many disparate types of people together, whether rich, poor, black, white, male, female, whoever. Everyone needs to be able to say, this activity is legitimate, and even if I don't win, I want to take part in it. Only a re-emphasis on the process can do that. Solely focusing on results can't do it. So just like playing a board game or playing a sport, at the end of the game, even if you lose, people need to be able to say, yeah, it wasn't the outcome I wanted, but I enjoyed it, and I want to play again next week, or I want to play again next season. Because you're embracing the process of playing, not just the winning and losing. Now, just to clarify, I'm not saying ends or outcomes don't matter. Obviously, we all prefer life to death and wealth to poverty, or health to sickness, freedom to slavery, whatever. We all have things that we want. I mean, sunny days to rainy days. I mean, ends do matter. Because we're always aiming at something. We always have goals we want to see brought about in the world. But as we said with the Federalist Papers, and James Madison was so eloquent in writing, the goal isn't utopia. Humans are just way too flawed to achieve that. As they wrote, and our other founders believed, we need a system that simply just won't allow our flawed citizens to screw things up too catastrophically. So we have to change our mindset toward, what will allow us all to keep participating and not ruin everything. And that seems to be where our culture is going. We seem to be doing a lot of tearing things down, a lot of demonizing, a lot of ruining things. We can't do that if we're going to sustain. Speech and debate are the only way. We have to be able to communicate with each other freely. And so, as James Madison wrote, a great line he said is, we need a way for ambition to counteract ambition. When we have all these competing ends we want, these competing outcomes, we need a way for them to counteract each other. And speech is that ultimate mediator that ensures that the process can continue. So it seems like, sadly, America is moving toward, and has been for a while, this odd blend of utilitarian and quasi-Marxist philosophies, those that seem to follow Machiavelli's famous line that the ends justify the means. And that just can't work, because if you try that, you won't survive for very long. Because it's tyrannical, and tyrannies fall apart fairly quickly, actually. Remember, it has to be voluntary, has to be repeatable, has to allow for cooperation and competition. If it relies on force, where you think the end is so important that I will force people to achieve it, well, that can't be repeated. The idea of cooperate with me or else. No competition is allowed. My way is the right way, and if you're against me, you're the enemy. That doesn't work, and we're seeing way too much of that in the current culture. We have to change that course as soon as possible. So, democracy, legal justice, science, capitalism are perhaps the four most important parts of our public life, our social and political life. We have to get the processes right so that we can trust our institutions again and bring some stability back to our culture. Let's get back to embracing process. Thanks for listening. If I missed anything, leave me a comment below, and join me next time here on the English Champion Podcast.